This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rebecca Dittman, Liverpool, United Kingdom. Web address mercurialspirit.co.uk. The Adventures of Ulysses by Charles Lamb. Preface. This work is designed as a supplement to the adventures of Telemachus. It treats of the conduct and sufferings of Ulysses, the father of Telemachus. The picture which it exhibits is that of a brave man struggling with adversity. By the wise use of events, and with an inimitable presence of mind under difficulties, forcing out a way for himself through the severest trials to which human life can be exposed, with enemies, natural and preternatural, surrounding him on all sides. The agents in this tale, besides men and women, are giants, enchanters, sirens, things which denote external force or internal temptations, the twofold danger which a wise fortitude must expect to encounter in its course through this world. The fictions contained in it will be found to comprehend some of the most admired inventions of Grecian mythology. The groundwork of the story is as old as the Odyssey, but the moral and the colouring are comparatively modern. By avoiding the prolixity which marks the speeches and the descriptions in Homer, I have gained a rapidity to the narration which I hope will make it more attractive, and give it more the air of a romance to young readers, though I am sensible that by the curtailment I have sacrificed in many places the manners to the passion, the subordinate characteristics to the essential interest of the story. The attempt is not to be considered as seeking a comparison with any of the direct translations of the Odyssey, either in prose or verse, though if I were to state the obligations which I have had to one obsolete version, I should run the hazard of depriving myself of the very slender degree of reputation which I could hope to acquire from a trifle like the present undertaking. End of preface. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rebecca Dittman, Liverpool, United Kingdom. Web address mercurialspirit.co.uk. The Adventures of Ulysses by Charles Lamb. Chapter 1. This history tells of the wanderings of Ulysses and his followers in their return from Troy, after the destruction of that famous city of Asia by the Grecians. He was inflamed with the desire of seeing again, after 10 years' absence, his wife and native country, Ithaca. He was king of a barren spot and a poor country in comparison of the fruitful plains of Asia, which he was leaving, or the wealthy kingdoms which he touched upon his return. Yet, wherever he came, he could never see a soil which appeared in his eyes half so sweet or desirable as his country earth. This made him refuse the offers of the goddess Calypso to stay with her and partake of her immortality in the delightful island, and this gave him the strength to break from the enchantments of Circe, the daughter of the sun. From Troy, ill winds cast Ulysses and his fleet upon the coast of the Cicons, a people hostile to the Grecians. Landing his forces, he laid siege to their chief city, Ismarus, which he took, and with it much spoil, and slew many people. But success proved fatal to him, for his soldiers, elated with the spoil, and the good store of provisions which they found in that place, fell to eating and drinking, forgetful of their safety, till the Cicons, who inhabited the coast, had time to assemble their friends and allies from the interior, who, mustering in prodigious force, set upon the Grecians, while they negligently revelled and feasted, and slew many of them, and recovered the spoil. They, dispirited and thinned in their numbers, with difficulty made their retreat good to the ships. Thence they set sail, sad at heart, yet something cheered that with such fearful odds against them, they had not all been utterly destroyed. A dreadful tempest ensued, which for 2 nights and 2 days tossed them about, but the 3rd day the weather cleared, and they had hopes of a favourable gale to carry them to Ithaca. But, as they doubled the Cape of Malea, suddenly a north wind arising drove them back as far as Cythera. After that, for the space of 9 days, contrary winds continued to drive them in an opposite direction to the point to which they were bound, and the 10th day they put in at a shore where a race of men dwell that are sustained by the fruit of the lotus tree. Here Ulysses sent some of his men to land for fresh water, who were met by certain of the inhabitants, that gave them some of their country food to eat, not with any ill intention toward them, though in the event it proved pernicious. For having eaten of this fruit, so pleasant it proved to their appetite, that they in a minute quite forgot all thoughts of home, or of their countrymen, or of ever returning back to the ships, to give an account of what sort of inhabitants dwelt there. But they would needs stay and live among them, and eat of that precious food for ever. And when Ulysses sent other of his men to look for them, and to bring them back by force, they strove, and wept, and would not leave their food for heaven itself, so much the pleasure of that enchanting fruit had bewitched them. But Ulysses caused them to be bound hand and foot, and cast under the hatches, and set sail with all possible speed from that baneful coast, lest others after them might taste the lotus, which had such strange qualities to make men forget their native country and the thoughts of home. Coasting on all that night by unknown and out of the way shores, they came by daybreak to the land where the Cyclops dwell, a sort of giant shepherds that neither sow nor plough, but the earth untilled produces for them rich wheat and barley and grapes, yet they have neither bread nor wine, nor know the arts of cultivation, nor care to know them, for they live each man to himself, without law or government, or anything like a state or kingdom. But their dwellings are in caves on the steep heads of mountains, every man's household governed by his own caprice, or not governed at all. Their wives and children are lawless as themselves, none caring for others, but each doing as he or she thinks good. Ships or boats they have none, nor artificers to make them, no trade or commerce, or wish to visit other shores. Yet they have convenient places for harbours and for shipping. Here Ulysses, with a chosen party of 12 followers, landed, to explore what sort of men dwelt there, whether hospitable and friendly to strangers, or altogether wild and savage, for as yet no dwellers appeared in sight. The first sign of habitation which they came to was a giant's cave rudely fashioned, but of a size which betokened the vast proportions of its owner, the pillars which supported it being the bodies of huge oaks or pines, in the natural state of the trees, and all about showed more marks of strength and skill in whoever built it. Ulysses, entering it, admired the savage contrivances and artless structures of the place, and longed to see the tenant of so outlandish a mansion, but well conjecturing that gifts would have more avail in extracting courtesy than strength would succeed in forcing it from such a one as he expected to find the inhabitant, he resolved to flatter his hospitality with a present of Greek wine, of which he had store in 12 great vessels, so strong that no one ever drank it without an infusion of 20 parts of water to 1 of wine. Yet the fragrance of it even then so delicious that it would have vexed a man who smelled it to abstain from tasting it. But whoever tasted it, it was able to raise his courage to the height of heroic deeds. Taking with them a goatskin flagonful of this precious liquor, they ventured into the recesses of the cave. Here they pleased themselves a whole day with beholding the giant's kitchen, where the flesh of sheep and goats lay strewed, his dairy, where goat milk stood ranged in troughs and pails, his pens, where he kept his live animals, but those he had driven forth to pasture with him when he went out in the morning. While they were feasting their eyes with a sight of these curiosities, their ears were suddenly deafened with a noise like the falling of a house. It was the owner of the cave, who had been abroad all day feeding his flock, as his custom was, in the mountains, and now drove them home in the evening from pasture. He threw down a pile of firewood which he had been gathering against supper time, before the mouth of the cave, which occasioned the crash they heard. The Grecians hid themselves in the remote parts of the cave at the sight of the uncouth monster. It was Polyphemus, the largest and savagest of the Cyclops, who boasted himself to be the son of Neptune. He looked more like a mountain crag than a man, and to his brutal body he had a brutish mind answerable. He drove his flock, all that gave milk, to the interior of the cave, but left the rams and the he-goats without. Then taking up a stone so massy that 20 oxen could not have drawn it, he placed it at the mouth of the cave, to defend the entrance, and sat him down to milk his ewes and his goats, which done, he lastly kindled a fire, and throwing his great eye round the cave, for the Cyclops have no more than one eye, and that placed in the midst of their forehead, by the glimmering light he discerned some of Ulysses's men.
"Ho, guests! What are you? Merchants or wandering thieves?"
he bellowed out in a voice which took from them all power of reply, it was so astounding. Only Ulysses summoned resolution to answer that they came neither for plunder nor traffic, but were Grecians who had lost their way, returning from Troy, which famous city, under the conduct of Agamemnon, the renowned son of Atreus, they had sacked, and laid level to the ground. Yet now they prostrated themselves humbly before his feet, whom they acknowledged to be mightier than they, and besought him that he would bestow the rights of hospitality upon them, for that Jove was the avenger of wrongs done to strangers, and would fiercely resent any injury which they might suffer.
"Fool!" said the Cyclop, "to come so far to preach to me the fear of the gods. We Cyclops care not for your Jove, whom you fable to be nursed by a goat, nor any of your blessed ones. We are stronger than they, and dare bid open battle to Jove himself, though you and all your fellows of the earth join with him."
And he bade them tell him where their ship was in which they came, and whether they had any companions. But Ulysses, with wise caution, made answer that they had no ship or companions, but were unfortunate men, who the sea, splitting their ship in pieces, had dashed upon his coast, and they alone had escaped. He replied nothing, but gripping 2 of the nearest of them, as if they had been no more than children, he dashed their brains out against the earth, and, shocking to relate, tore in pieces their limbs, and devoured them yet warm and trembling, making a lion's meal of them, lapping the blood. For the Cyclops are man-eaters, and esteem human flesh to be a delicacy far above goats or kids, though by reason of their abhorred customs few men approach their coast, except some stragglers, or now and then a shipwrecked mariner. At a sight so horrid, Ulysses and his men were like distracted people. He, when he had made an end to his wicked supper, drained a draught of goat's milk down his prodigious throat, and lay down and slept among his goats. Then Ulysses drew his sword, and half resolved to thrust it with all his might in at the bosom of the sleeping monster. But wiser thoughts restrained him, else they had there without help all perished, for none but Polyphemus himself could have removed that mass of stone which he had placed to guard the entrance. So they were constrained to abide all that night in fear. When day came, the Cyclop awoke, and kindling a fire, made his breakfast of two other of his unfortunate prisoners, then milked his goats as he was accustomed, and pushing aside the vast stone, and shutting it again when he had done upon the prisoners, with as much ease as a man opens and shuts a quiver's lid, he let out his flock, and drove them before him with whistlings, as sharp as winds in storm, to the mountains. Then Ulysses, of whose strength and cunning the Cyclops seems to have had as little heed as of an infant's, being left alone, with the remnant of his men which the Cyclop had not devoured, gave manifest proof how far manly wisdom excels brutish force. He chose a stake from among the wood which the Cyclop had piled up for firing, in length and thickness like a mast, which he sharpened and hardened in the fire, and selected 4 men, and instructed them what they should do with this stake, and made them perfect in their parts. When the evening was come, the Cyclop drove home his sheep, and as fortune directed it, either of purpose, or that his memory was overruled by the gods to his hurt, as in the issue it proved, he drove the males of his flock, contrary to his custom, along with the dams into the pens. Then shutting to the stone of the cave, he fell to his horrible supper. When he had dispatched 2 more of the Grecians, Ulysses waxed bold with the contemplation of his project, and took a bowl of Greek wine, and merrily dared the Cyclop to drink. "Cyclop," he said, "take a bowl of wine from the hand of your guest. It may serve to digest the man's flesh that you have eaten, and show what drink our ship held before it went down. All I ask in recompense, if you find it good, is to be dismissed in a whole skin. Truly you must look to have few visitors, if you observe this new custom of eating your guests." The brute took and drank, and vehemently enjoyed the taste of wine, which was new to him, and swilled again at the flagon, and entreated for more, and prayed Ulysses to tell him his name, that he might bestow a gift upon the man who had given him such brave liquor. The Cyclops, he said, had grapes, but this rich juice, he swore, was simply divine. Again Ulysses plied him with the wine, and the fool drank it as fast as he poured out, and again he asked the name of his benefactor, which Ulysses, cunningly dissembling, said, "My name is No Man. My kindred and friends in my own country call me No Man."
"Then," said the Cyclop, "this is the kindness I will show thee, No Man. I will eat thee last of all thy friends." He had scarce expressed his savage kindness, when the fumes of the strong wine overcame him, and he reeled down upon the floor, and sank into a dead sleep. Ulysses watched his time, while the monster lay insensible, and heartening up his men, they placed the sharp end of the stake in the fire till it was heated red hot, and some god gave them a courage beyond that which they were used to have, and the 4 men with difficulty bored the sharp end of the huge stake, which they had heated red hot, right into the eye of the drunken cannibal, and Ulysses helped to thrust it in with all his might, still farther and farther with effort, as men bore with an auger, till the scalded blood gushed out, and the eyeball smoked, and the strings of the eye cracked, as the burning rafter broke in it, and the eye hissed, as hot iron hisses when it is plunged into water.
He, waking, roared with the pain so loud that all the cavern broke into claps like thunder. They fled and dispersed into corners. He plucked the burning stake from his eye and hurled the wood madly about the cave. Then he cried out with a mighty voice for his brethren the Cyclops that dwelt hard by in the caverns upon hills. They, hearing the terrible shout, came flocking from all parts to inquire what ailed Polyphemus, and what cause he had for making such horrid clamours in the night time to break their sleeps, if his fright proceeded from any mortal, if strength or craft had given him his death's blow. He made answer from within that no man had hurt him, no man had killed him, no man was with him in the cave. They replied, If no man has hurt thee, and no man is with thee, then thou art alone, and the evil that afflicts thee is in the hand of heaven, which none can resist or help. So they left him and went their way, thinking that some disease troubled him. He, blind and ready to split with the anguish of the pain, went groaning up and down in the dark to find the doorway, which when he found, he removed the stone and sat in the threshold, feeling if he could lay hold on any man going out with the sheep, which, the day now breaking, were beginning to issue forth to their accustomed pastures. But Ulysses, whose first artifice in giving himself that ambiguous name had succeeded so well with the Cyclop, was not of a wit so gross to be caught by that palpable device. But casting about in his mind all the ways which he could contrive for escape, no less than all their lives depending on the success, at last he thought of this expedient. He made knots of the osier twigs upon which the Cyclop commonly slept, with which he tied the fattest and the fleeciest of the rams together, 3 in a rank, and under the belly of the middle ram he tied a man, and himself last, wrapping himself fast with both his hands in the rich wool of one, the fairest of the flock. And now the sheep began to issue forth very fast. The males went first. The females, unmilked, stood by, bleating and requiring the hand of their shepherd in vain to milk them, their full bags sore with being unemptied, but he much sorer with the loss of sight. Still, as the males passed, he felt the backs of those fleecy fools, never dreaming that they carried his enemies under their bellies. So they passed on till the last ram came loaded with his wool and Ulysses together. He stopped that ram and felt him, and had his hand once in the hair of Ulysses, yet knew it not, and he chid the lamb for being last, and spoke to it as if it understood him, and asked it whether it did not wish that its master had his eye again, which that abominable no-man with his execrable rout had put out, when they had got him down with wine. And he willed the ram to tell him whereabouts in the cave his enemy lurked, that he might dash his brains and strew them about, to ease his heart of that tormenting revenge which rankled in it. After a deal of such foolish talk to the beast, he let it go. When Ulysses found himself free, he let go his hold and assisted in disengaging his friends. The rams which had befriended them they carried off with them to the ships, where their companions with tears in their eyes received them as men escaped from death. They plied their oars and set their sails, and when they got as far off from shore as a voice could reach, Ulysses cried out to the Cyclop, Cyclop, thou shouldst not have so much abused thy monstrous strength as to devour thy guests. Jove by my hand sends thee requital to pay thy savage inhumanity. The Cyclop heard, and came forth enraged, and in his anger he plucked a fragment of a rock, and threw it with blind fury at the ships. It narrowly escaped lighting upon the bark in which Ulysses sat, but with the fall it raised so fierce an ebb as bore back the ship till it almost touched the shore. Cyclop, said Ulysses, if any ask thee who imposed on thee that unsightly blemish in thine eye, Say it was Ulysses, son of Laertes, the king of Ithaca am I called, the waster of cities." Then they crowded sail, and beat the old sea, and forth they went with a forward gale, sad for past losses, yet glad to have escaped at any rate, till they came to the isle where Aeolus reigned, who is god of the winds. Here Ulysses and his men were courteously received by the monarch, who showed him his 12 children, which have rule over the 12 winds. A month they stayed and feasted with him, and at the end of the month he dismissed them with many presents, and gave to Ulysses at parting an ox's hide, in which were enclosed all the winds. Only he left abroad the western wind, to play upon their sails, and waft them gently home to Ithaca. This bag, bound in a glittering silver band so close that no breath could escape, Ulysses hung up at the mast. His companions did not know its contents, but guessed that the monarch had given him some treasures of gold or silver. 9 days they sailed smoothly, favoured by the western wind, and by the 10th they approached so nigh as to discern lights kindled on the shores of their country earth, when by ill fortune Ulysses, overcome with fatigue of watching the helm, fell asleep. The mariners seized the opportunity, and one of them said to the rest, "A fine time has this leader of ours. Whenever he goes he is sure of presents, when he come away empty-handed. And see what King Aeolus has given him, store no doubt of gold and silver." A word was enough to those covetous wretches, who quick as thought untied the bag, and instead of gold, out rushed the mighty noise, all the winds. Ulysses with the noise awoke, and saw their mistake, but too late, for the ship was driven with all the winds back far from Ithaca, far as to the island of Aeolus, from which they had parted, in 1 hour measuring back what in 9 days they had scarcely tracked, and in sight of home too. Up he flew amazed, and raving doubted whether he should not fling himself into the sea for grief of his bitter disappointment. At last he hid himself upon the hatches for shame, and scarce could he be prevailed upon, when he was told he was arrived again in the harbour of King Aeolus, and to go himself or send to that monarch for a second succour, so much the disgrace of having misused his royal bounty, though it was the crime of his followers and not his own, weighed upon him. And when at last he went and took a herald with him, and came where the god sat on his throne, feasting with his children, he would not thrust in among them at their meat, but set himself down like one unworthy in the threshold. Indignation seized Aeolus to behold him in that manner returned, and he said, "Ulysses, what has brought you back? Are you so tired of your country, or did not our present please you? We thought we had given you a kingly passport." Ulysses made answer, "My men have done this ill mischief to me. They did it while I slept." "Wretch," said Aeolus, "avaunt, and quit our shores. It fits not us to convey men whom the gods hate, and will have perish." Forth they sailed, but with far different hopes than when they had left the same harbour the first time with all the winds confined. Only the west wind suffered to play upon their sails, to waft them in gentle murmurs to Ithaca. They were now the sport of every gale that blew, and despaired of ever seeing home more. Now those covetous mariners were cured of their surfeit for gold, and would not have touched it if it had lain in untold heaps before them. 6 days and nights they drove along, and on the 7th day they put into Lamos, a port of the Laestrygonians. So spacious this harbour was, that it held with ease all their fleet, which rode at anchor, safe from any storms, all but the ship in which Ulysses was embarked. He, as if prophetic of the mischance which followed, kept still without the harbour, making fast his bark to a rock at the land's point, which he climbed with purpose to survey the country. He saw a city with smoke ascending from the roofs, but neither ploughs going, nor oxen yoked, nor any sign of agricultural works. Making choice of 2 men, he sent them to the city to explore what sort of inhabitants dwelt there. His messengers had not gone far before they met a damsel, of stature surpassing human, who was coming to draw water from a spring. They asked her who dwelt in that land. She made no reply, but led them in silence to her father's palace. He was a monarch, and named Antiphas. He and all his people were giants. When they entered the palace, a woman, the mother of the damsel, but far taller than she, rushed abroad and called for Antiphas. He came, and snatching up one of the 2 men, made as if he would devour him. The other fled. Antiphas raised a mighty shout, and instantly, this way and that, multitudes of gigantic people issued out of the gates, and making for the harbour, tore up huge pieces of the rocks and flung them at the ships which lay there, all which were utterly overwhelmed and sank, and the unfortunate bodies of men which floated, and which the sea did not devour, these cannibals thrust through with harpoons like fishes, and bore them off to their dire feast. Ulysses, with his single bark, that had never entered the harbour, escaped. That bark, which was now the only vessel left of all the gallant navy that had set sail with him from Troy. He pushed off from the shore, cheering the sad remnant of his men, whom horror at the sight of their countryman's fate had almost turned to marble. End of chapter 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rebecca Dittman, Liverpool, United Kingdom. Web address mercurialspirit.co.uk. The Adventures of Ulysses by Charles Lamb. Chapter 2. On went the single ship till it came to the island of Aeaea, where Circe, the dreadful daughter of the sun, dwelt. She was deeply skilled in magic, a haughty beauty, and had hair like the sun. The sun was her parent, and begot her and her brother Aeetes, such another as herself, upon Perse, daughter of Oceanus. Here a dispute arose among Ulysses's men, which of them should go ashore to explore the country, for there was a necessity that some should go to procure water and provisions, their stock of both being nigh spent. But their hearts failed them when they called to mind the shocking fate of their fellows whom the Laestrygonians had eaten, and those which the foul Cyclop Polyphemus had crushed between his jaws, which moved them so tenderly in the recollection that they wept. But tears yet supplied any man's wants. This Ulysses knew full well, and dividing his men, all that were left, into 2 companies, at the head of one of which was himself, and at the head of the other Euryclus, a man of tried courage, he cast lots which of them should go up into the country, and the lot fell upon Euryclus and his company, 22 in number, who took their leave, with tears, of Ulysses and his men that stayed, whose eyes wore the same wet badges of weak humanity. For they surely thought never to see these their companions again, but that on every coast where they should come they should find nothing but savages and cannibals. Euryclus and his party proceeded up the country, till in a dale they descried the house of Circe, built of bright stone by the roadside. Before her gate lay many beasts, as wolves, lions, leopards, which by her art of wild she had rendered tame. These arose when they saw strangers, and ramped upon their hinder paws, and fawned when Eurylochus and his men, who dreaded the effects of such monstrous kindness. And staying at the gate, they heard the enchantress within, sitting at her loom, singing such strains as suspended all mortal faculties, while she wove a web, subtle and glorious, and of a texture inimitable on earth, as all the housewiferys of the deities are. Strains so ravishingly sweet provoked even the sagest and prudentest heads amongst the party to knock and call at the gate. The shining gate the enchantress opened, and bade them come in and feast. They, unwise, followed, all but Eurylochus, who stayed without the gate, suspicious that some train was laid for them. Being entered, she placed them in chairs of state, and set before them meal and honey, and Smyrna wine, but mixed with baneful drugs of powerful enchantment. When they had eaten of these, and drunk of her cup, she touched them with her charming rod, and straight they were transformed into swine, having the bodies of swine, the bristles and snout and grunting noises of that animal. Only they still retained the minds of men, which made them the more to lament their brutish transformation. Having changed them, she shut them up in her sty with many more whom her wicked sorceries had formerly changed, and gave them swine's food, mast and acorns and chestnuts to eat. Eurylochus, who had beheld nothing of these sad changes from where he was stationed without the gate, only instead of his companions that entered, who he thought had all vanished by witchcraft, beheld a herd of swine, hurried back to the ship to give an account of what he had seen, but so frighted and perplexed that he could give no distinct report of anything. Only he remembered a palace, and a woman singing at her work, and gates guarded by lions, but his companions, he said, were all vanished. Then Ulysses, suspecting some foul witchcraft, snatched his sword and his bow, and commanded Eurylochus instantly to lead him to the place. But Eurylochus fell down, and embracing his knees, besought him by the name of a man whom the gods had in their protection not to expose his safety, and the safety of all of them, to certain destruction. Do thou then stay, Eurylochus, answered Ulysses. Eat thou and drink in the ship in safety, while I go alone upon this adventure. Necessity, from whose law is no appeal, compels me. So saying, he quitted the ship and went on shore, accompanied by none. None had the hardihood to offer to partake that perilous adventure with him, so much they dreaded the enchantments of the witch. Singly he pursued his journey till he came to the shining gates which stood before her mansion. But when he essayed to put his foot over her threshold, he was suddenly stopped by the apparition of a young man, bearing a golden rod in his hand, who was the god Mercury. He held Ulysses by the wrist to stay his entrance, and, "Whither wouldst thou go?" he said, "O thou most erring of the sons of men? Knowest thou not that this is the house of the great Circe, where she keeps thy friends in a loathsome sty, changed from the fair forms of men into the detestable and ugly shapes of swine? Art thou prepared to share their fate, from which nothing can ransom thee?" But neither his words nor his coming from heaven could stop the daring foot of Ulysses, whom compassion for the misfortune of his friends had rendered careless of danger, which when the god perceived, he had pity to see valour so misplaced, and gave him the flower of the herb moly, which is sovereign against enchantments. The moly is a small, unsightly root, its virtues little known and in low estimation, The dull shepherd treads on it every day with his clouted shoes, but it bears a small white flower, which is medicinal against charms, blights, mildews, and damps. Take this in thy hand, said Mercury, and with it boldly enter her gates. When she shall strike thee with her rod, thinking to change thee, as she has changed thy friends, boldly rush in upon her with thy sword, and extort from her the dreadful oath of the gods, that she will use no enchantments against thee. Then force her to restore thy abused companions. He gave Ulysses the little white flower, and, instructing him how to use it, vanished. When the god was departed, Ulysses with loud knockings beat at the gate of the palace. The shining gates were opened as before, and great Circe with hospitable cheer invited in her guest. She placed him on a throne with more distinction than she had used to his fellows. She mingled wine in a costly bowl, and he drank of it, mixed with those poisonous drugs. When he had drunk, she struck him with her charming rod, and "To thy sty!" she cried. "Out, swine, mingle with your companions." But those powerful words were not proof against the preservation which Mercury had given to Ulysses. He remained unchanged, and, as the god had directed him, boldly charged the witch with his sword, as if he meant to take her life, which when she saw and perceived that her charms were weak against the antidote which Ulysses bore about him, she cried out and bent her knees beneath his sword, embracing his, and said, "Who or what manner of man art thou? Never drank any man before thee of this cup, but he repented it in some brute's form. Thy shape remains unaltered as thy mind. Thou canst be none other than Ulysses, renowned all the world for wisdom, whom the fates have long since decreed that I must love. This haughty bosom bends to thee. O Ithacan, a goddess woos thee to her bed." "O Circe," he replied, "how canst thou treat of love or marriage with one whose friends have been turned into beasts? And now offerest him thy hand in wedlock, only that thou mightst have him in thy power, to live the life of a beast with thee, naked, effeminate, subject to thy will, perhaps to be advanced in time to the honour of a place in thy sty? What pleasure canst thou promise which may tempt the soul of a reasonable man? Thy meat spiced with poison, or thy wines drugged with death? Thou must swear to me that thou wilt never attempt against me the treasons which thou hast practised upon my friends." The enchantress, won by the terror of his threats, or by the violence of that new love which she felt kindling in her veins for him, swore by Styx, the great oath of the gods, that she meditated no injury to him. Then Ulysses made show of gentler treatment, which gave her hopes of inspiring him with a passion equal to that which she felt. She called her handmaids, 4 that served her in chief, who were daughters to her silver fountains, to her sacred rivers, and to her consecrated woods, to deck her apartments, to spread rich carpets, and set out her silver tables with dishes of the purest gold, and meat as precious as that which the gods eat, to entertain her guests. One brought water to wash his feet, and one brought wine to chase away, with a refreshing sweetness, the sorrows that had come of late so thick upon him, and hurt his noble mind. They strewed perfumes on his head, and, after he had bathed in a bath of the choicest aromatics, they brought him rich and costly apparel to put on. Then he was conducted to a throne of massy silver, and a regale fit for Jove when he banquets was placed before him. But the feast which Ulysses desired was to see his friends, the partners of his voyage, once more in the shapes of men, and the food which could give him nourishment must be taken in at his eyes. Because he missed this sight, he sat melancholy and thoughtful, and would taste of none of the rich delicacies placed before him, which when Circe noted, she easily divined the cause of his sadness, and leaving the seat in which she sat throned, went to her sty, and let abroad his men, who came in like swine, and filled the ample hall where Ulysses sat with gruntings. Hardly had he time to let his sad eye run over their altered forms and brutal metamorphosis, when, with an ointment which he smeared over them, suddenly their bristles fell off, and they started up in their own shapes, men as before. They knew their leader again, and clung about him, with joy of their late restoration, and some shame for their late change, and wept so loud, blubbering out their joy in broken accents, that the palace was filled with a sound of pleasing mourning, and the witch herself, great Circe, was not unmoved at the sight. To make her atonement complete, she sent for the remnant of Ulysses's men, who stayed behind at the ship, giving up their great commander for lost, who, when they came and saw him again alive, circled with their fellows. No expression can tell what joy they felt. They even cried out with rapture, and to have seen their frantic expressions of mirth, a man might have supposed that they were just in sight of their country earth, the cliffs of rocky Ithaca. Only Eurylochus would hardly be persuaded to enter that palace of wonders, for he remembered with a kind of horror how his companions had vanished from his sight. Then great Circe spake, and gave order that there should be no more sadness among them, nor remembering of past sufferings. For as yet they feared like men that are exiles from their country, and if a gleam of mirth shot among them, it was suddenly quenched with the thought of their helpless and homeless condition. Her kind persuasions wrought upon Ulysses and the rest, that they spent 12 months in all manner of delight with her in her palace. For Circe was a powerful magician, and could command the moon from her sphere, or unroot the solid oak from its place, to make it dance for their diversion. And by the help of her illusions she could vary the taste of pleasures, and contrive delights, recreations, and jolly pastimes, to fetch the day about from sun to sun, and rock the tedious year as in a delightful dream. At length Ulysses awoke from the trance of the faculties into which her charms had thrown him, and the thought of home returned with tenfold vigour to goad and sting him. That home where he had left his virtuous wife Penelope and his young son Telemachus. One day, when Circe had been lavish of her caresses, and was in her kindest humour, he moved her subtly, and as it were afar off, the question of his home return, to which she answered firmly, "O Ulysses, it is not in my power to detain one whom the gods have destined to further trials, but leaving me, before you pursue your journey home, you must visit the house of Hades, or Death, to consult the shade of Tiresias, the Tibetan prophet, to whom alone of all the dead, Proserpine, Queen of Hell, has committed the secret of future events. It is he that must inform you whether you shall ever see again your wife and country." "O Circe," he cried, "that is impossible. Who shall steer my course to Pluto's kingdom? Never ship has strength to make that voyage." "Seek no guide," she replied, "but raise you your mast, and hoist your white sails, and sit in your ship in peace. The north wind shall waft you through the seas, till you shall cross the expanse of the ocean, and come to where grow the poplar groves and willows pale of Proserpine, where Pyriphlegon and Cocytus and Acheron mingle their waves. Cocytus is an arm of Styx, the forgetful river. Here dig a pit, and make it a cubit broad and a cubit long, and pour in milk and honey and wine, and the blood of a ram, and the blood of a black ewe, and turn away thy face while thou pourest in, and the dead shall come flocking to taste the milk and the blood, but suffer none to approach thy offering till thou hast inquired of Tiresias all which thou wishest to know." He did as great Circe had appointed. He raised his mast, and hoisted his white sails, and sat in his ship in peace. The north wind wafted him through the seas till he crossed the ocean and came to the sacred woods of Proserpine. He stood at the confluence of the three floods and digged a pit, as she had given directions, and poured in his offering, the blood of a ram, the blood of a black ewe, milk and honey and wine. And the dead came to his banquet, aged men and women, and youths and children who died in infancy, but none of them would he suffer to approach and dip their thin lips in the offering, till Tiresias was served, not though his own mother was among the number, whom now for the first time he knew to be dead. For he had left her living when he went to Troy, and she had died since his departure, and the tidings never reached him. Though it irked his soul to use constraint upon her, yet in compliance with the injunction of great Circe, he forced her to retire along with the other ghosts. Then Tiresias, who bore a golden sceptre, came and lapped of the offering, and immediately he knew Ulysses, and began to prophesy. He denounced, "Woe to Ulysses, woe, woe, and many sufferings, through the anger of Neptune for the putting out of the eye of the sea god's son. Yet there was safety after suffering, if they could abstain from slaughtering the oxen of the sun after they landed in the triangular island. For Ulysses, the gods had destined him from a king to become a beggar, and to perish by his own guests, unless he slew those who knew him not." This prophecy, ambiguously delivered, was all that Tiresias was empowered to unfold, or else there was no longer place for him, for now the souls of the other dead came flocking in such numbers, tumultuously demanding the blood, that freezing horror seized the limbs of the living Ulysses, to see so many, and all dead, and he the only one alive in that region. Now his mother came and lapped the blood, without restraint from her son, and now she knew him to be her son, and inquired of him why he had come alive to their comfortless habitations. And she said that affliction for Ulysses's long absence had preyed upon her spirits, and brought her to the grave. Ulysses's soul melted at her moving narration, and forgetting the state of the dead, and that the airy texture of disembodied spirits does not admit of the embraces of flesh and blood, he threw his arms about her to clasp her. The poor ghost melted from his embrace, and, looking mournfully upon him, vanished away. Then he saw other females, Tyro, who when she lived was the paramour of Neptune, and by him had Peleus and Neleus, Antiope, who bore two like sons to Jove, Amphion and Zethus, founders of Thebes, Alcina, the mother of Hercules, with her fair daughter, afterwards her daughter-in-law, Megara. There also Ulysses saw Jocasta, the unfortunate mother and wife of Oedipus, who, ignorant of kin, wedded with her son, and when she had discovered the unnatural alliance, for shame and grief hanged herself. He continued to drag a wretched life above the earth, haunted by the dreadful Furies. There was Leda, the wife of Tyndarus, the mother of the beautiful Helen, and of the two brave brothers, Castor and Pollux, who obtained his grace from Jove, that, being dead, they should enjoy life alternately, living in pleasant places under the earth. For Pollux had prayed that his brother Castor, who was subject to death, as the son of Tyndarus, should partake of his own immortality, which he derived from an immortal sire. This the fates denied. Therefore Pollux was permitted to divide his immortality with his brother Castor, dying and living alternatively. There was Iphimedia, who bore two sons to Neptune that were giants, Otus and Ephialtes. Earth in her prodigality never nourished bodies to such portentous size and beauty as these two children were of, except Orion. At 9 years old they had imaginations of climbing to heaven to see what the gods were doing, They thought to make stairs of mountains, and were for piling Ossa upon Olympus, and setting Pelion upon that, and had perhaps performed it, if they had lived till they were striplings, but they were cut off by death in the infancy of their ambitious project. Phaedra was there, and Procris, and Ariadne, mournful of Theseus's desertion, and Myrrha, and Clymene, and Eriphyle, who preferred gold before wedlock faith. But now came a mournful ghost. That late was Agamemnon, the son of Atreus, the mighty leader of all the host of Greece and their confederate kings that warred against Troy. He came with the rest to sip a little of the blood at that uncomfortable banquet. Ulysses was moved with compassion to see him among them, and asked him what untimely fate had brought him there, if storms had overwhelmed him coming from Troy, or if he had perished in some mutiny by his own soldiers at a division of the prey. By none of these, he replied, did I come to my death, but slain at a banquet to which I was invited by Aegisthus after my return home. He conspiring with my adulterous wife, they laid a scheme for my destruction, training me forth to a banquet as an ox goes to the slaughter, and there surrounding me, they slew me with all my friends about me. Clytemnestra, my wicked wife, forgetting the vows which she swore to me in wedlock, would not lend a hand to close my eyes in death. But nothing is so heaped with impieties as such a woman, who would kill her spouse that married her a maid. When I brought her home to my house a bride, I hoped in my heart that she would be loving to me and to my children. Now her black treacheries have cast a foul aspersion on her whole sex. Blessed husbands will have their loving wives in suspicion for her bad deeds. Alas, said Ulysses, there seems to be a fatality in your royal house of Atreus, and that they are hated of Jove for their wives. For Helen's sake, your brother Menelaus's wife, what multitudes fell in the wars of Troy? Agamemnon replied, For this cause be not thou more kind than wise to any woman. Let not thy words express to her at any time all that is in thy mind. Keep still some secrets to thyself, but thou by any bloody contrivances of thy wife never needst fear to fall. Exceeding wise she is, and to her wisdom she has a goodness as eminent. Icarus's daughter, Penelope the chaste, we left her a young bride when we parted from our wives to go to the wars, her first child suckling at her breast, the young Telemachus, whom you shall see grown up to manhood on your return, and he shall greet his father with befitting welcomes. My Orestes, my dear son, I shall never see again. His mother has deprived his father of the sight of him, and perhaps will slay him as she slew his sire. It is now no world to trust a woman in. But what says fame? Is my son yet alive? Lives he in Orchomen, or in Pylus, or is he resident in Sparta, in his uncle's court? As yet, I see, divine Orestes is not here with me. To this Ulysses replied he had received no certain tidings where Orestes abode, only some uncertain rumours which he could not report for truth. While they held this sad conference, with kind tears striving to render unkind fortunes more palatable, the soul of great Achilles joined them. What desperate adventure has brought Ulysses to these regions, said Achilles, to see the end of dead men and their foolish shades? Ulysses answered him that he had come to consult Tiresias respecting his voyage home. But thou, O son of Thetis, he said, why dost thou disparage the state of the dead, seeing that as alive thou didst surpass all men in glory? Thou must needs retain thy preeminence here below, so great Achilles triumphs over death. but Achilles made reply that he had much rather be a pleasant slave upon the earth than reign over all the dead. So much did the inactivity and slothful condition of that state displease his unquenchable and restless spirit. Only he inquired of Ulysses if his father Peleus were living, and how his son Neoptolemus conducted himself. Of Peleus Ulysses could tell him nothing, but of Neoptolemus he thus bore witness. From Skyros I convoyed your son by sea to the Greeks, where I can speak of him, for I knew him. He was chief in council and in the field. When any question was proposed, so quick was his conceit in the forward apprehension of any case, that he ever spoke first, and was heard with more attention than the older heads. Only myself and aged Nestor could compare with him in giving advice. In battle I cannot speak his praise, unless I could count all that fell by his sword. I will only mention one instance of his manhood, when he sat hid in the belly of the wooden horse in the ambush which deceived the Trojans to their destruction. I, who had the management of that stratagem, still shifted my place from side to side to note the behaviour of our men. In some I marked their hearts trembling through all the pains which they took to appear valiant, and in others tears that in spite of manly courage would gush forth. And to say truth, it was an adventure of high enterprise, and as perilous a stake as was ever played in war's game. But in him I could not observe the least sign of weakness, no tears nor tremblings, but his hand stood on his good sword, and ever urging me to set open the machine and let us out before the time was come for doing it. And when we sallied out, he was still first in that fierce destruction and bloody midnight desolation of King Priam's city. This made the soul of Achilles to tread a swifter pace, with high raised feet, as he vanished away, for the joy which he took in his son being applauded by Ulysses. A sad shade stalked by, which Ulysses knew to be the ghost of Ajax, his opponent, when living in that famous dispute about the right of succeeding to the arms of the deceased Achilles, they being adjudged by the Greeks to Ulysses as the prize of wisdom above bodily strength. The noble Ajax in despite went mad and slew himself. The sight of his rival turned to a shade by his dispute so subdued the passion and emulation in Ulysses that for his sake he wished that judgment in that controversy had been given against himself, rather than so illustrious a chief should have perished for the desire of those arms which his prowess, second only to Achilles in fight, so eminently had deserved. "Ajax," he cried, "all the Greeks mourn for thee as much as they lamented for Achilles. Let not thy wrath burn for ever, great son of Telamon. Ulysses seeks peace with thee, and will make any atonement to thee that can appease thy hurt spirit." But the shade stalked on, and would not exchange a word with Ulysses, though he prayed it with many tears and many earnest entreaties. "He might have spoke to me," said Ulysses, "since I spoke to him, but I see the resentments of the dead are eternal." Then Ulysses saw a throne on which was placed a judge distributing sentence. He that sat on the throne was Minos, and he was dealing out just judgments to the dead. He it is that assigns them their place in bliss or woe. Then came by a thundering ghost, the large-limbed Orion, the mighty hunter, who was hunting there the ghosts of the beasts which he had slaughtered in the desert hills upon the earth. For the dead delight in the occupations which please them in the time of their living upon the earth. There was Tityus, suffering eternal pains because he had sought to violate the honour of Latona, as she had passed from Pytho into Panopeus. Two vultures sat perpetually preying upon his liver with their crooked beaks, which as fast as they devoured, it for ever renewed, nor can he fray them away with his great hands. There was Tantalus, plagued for his great sins, standing up to his chin in water which he can never taste, but still as he bows his head, thinking to quench his burning thirst, Instead of water, he licks up unsavoury dust. All fruits pleasant to the sight and of delicious flavour hang in ripe clusters about his head, seeming as though they offered themselves to be plucked by him. But when he reaches out his hand, some wind carries them far out of his sight into the clouds. So he is starved in the midst of plenty by the righteous doom of Jove, in memory of that inhuman banquet at which the sun turned pale, when the unnatural father served up the limbs of his little son in a dish, as meat for his divine guests. There was Sisyphus, that sees no end to his labours. His punishment is to be for ever rolling up a vast stone to the top of a mountain, which, when it gets to the top, falls down with a crushing weight, and all his work is to begin again. He was bathed all over in sweat that reeked out a smoke which covered his head like a mist. His crime had been the revealing of state secrets. There Ulysses saw Hercules, not that Hercules who enjoys immortal life in heaven among the gods, and is married to Hebe or Youth, but his shadow, which remains below. About him the dead flocked as thick as bats, hovering around and cuffing at his head. He stands with his dreadful bow, ever in the act to shoot. There also might Ulysses have seen and spoken with the shades of Theseus and Pirithous, and the old heroes, but he had conversed enough with horrors, therefore covering his face with his hands, that he might see no more spectres, he resumed his seat in his ship and pushed off. The bark moved itself without the help of any oar, and soon brought him out of the regions of death into the cheerful quarters of the living, and to the island of Aeaea, whence he had set forth. End of chapter 2.